All right, hello everyone. Thank you for watching the previous video that I uploaded. I wanted to take a few moments just to go over why I decided to release a video like that. Number one, straight up, I'm just like a huge Star Wars fan, so I've always, thought it'd be interesting to kind of do an opening crawl, but done kind of in the style of, done with modern everyday events taking place. So anyway, expect a video release of that every Friday. But more to the point, I've for a long time have been thinking that where we are in the world right now, in world history, I just feel like there's something big, I think, this on the horizon. And I think documenting it, especially, I think the Star Wars opening crawl format definitely lends itself to, this kind of format. It's actually interesting, George Lucas, when he wrote Star Wars, kind of had in mind the serials, the Saturday morning serials that he would watch, or that he would read rather, as a kid. And that is kind of like, that and like the Flash Gordon series that he liked. But those were kind of inspirations for what he wanted to create with Star Wars in particular. The opening crawl. Any of you who watched the Star Wars Clone Wars series also knows like the announcer guy, the voice. I forget the name of the guy who voices it, but it kind of encapsulates it kind of captures the scope or the theme that George wanted to have with Star Wars, which really was kind of a fantasy science fiction telling of global events that had happened, either shortly before he was born or kind of during his lifetime as a younger man. And then kind of like later on with the prequels, kind of covering things that he was worried about, the directions, the trends that worried him about the United States in particular, but just global events. Now, anyway, we're some 20 years after the release of Revenge of the Sith, and kind of reflecting on the world, it's almost too real in the sense of like there's so many lines of like intersecting lines of, I was going to say dialogue, but not dialogue, but intersecting themes that I feel like are really coming into play. I think this in particular, the rise of powerful corporate interests. I mean, that's always kind of been a thing. But I think just with the rise of AI, the rise of these like big tech companies, I really just think that they're on their way to trying to amass a lot of power for themselves and frankly steer the government, if not outright take over the government, in a way that's more friendly to them. So I think then in coming years, I don't think it would be outrageous to think that, businesses will have seats in major government parliaments around the world. It also wouldn't surprise me if the UN still exists, that businesses, major international corporations will lobby to have seats in the UN, as bodies representing their own interests over and above national interests around the world. And so that's just one aspect of it. But there's so many other things that I think like Star Wars really kind of plays around with. I mean, it's the concept of a politician taking power, but like kind of brokering side deals with terrorist organizations to kind of manufacture crises that they then, present the solutions to that grants them even more power. There's that epic rant by, why am I forgetting this guy's name? It's like tip of the tongue. Alex Jones, he has this epic rant. It's hilarious, of him explaining the Star Wars prequels in like 3 minutes. And, I just think there's a lot of things that when you look at the Star Wars franchise as a whole, really kind of hits home. And then obviously for anyone watching Andor or have watched Andor, everyone's been ranting and raving about how just timely it is without it actually feeling like propaganda. It just, because again, there's a timeliness to it. I think these are things, or human things, that will happen or have the ability to happen regardless of time or place. So anyway, I think there's a lot of things going on in the world that seem to kind of mimic that. So I just thought that the platform of the opening crawl in Star Wars kind of really, I think, captures, it's kind of full circle, capturing. And also, personally, I'm a huge World War II nerd and, World War II history. And I think there's a lot of things, especially with like the newsreels, like the announcer on the newsreels. I eat that stuff up. It's like, it's so campy and cheesy, but it's cool at the same time. It's actually inspiring to me looking back at it. So when I see that stuff, I'm kind of like, I kind of wish news programs covered global events kind of in the same way. So okay, getting some caveats out of the way. Obviously, I'm biased. I typically tend to have a more conservative bias. But I'm going to try to not let that show through in some of these things I write. I try to kind of keep it a little even-handed. But so if you feel like I'm being, too one way or one side, just keep watching, because eventually I'm going to probably say something that's going to piss one segment of the audience off. And then next week it'll be a different thing. So with that out of the way, what am I going to do with this channel? So yeah, this is kind of like a really casual, kind of almost impromptu decision to kind of just start this thing. I've been toying around with the concept of starting a podcast or starting a YouTube channel, and for ages, for years, and I just feel like now's the time. I plan to kind of dress this up as time goes on, as I kind of grow a followership, but over time I just plan to really kind of take this thing in a lot of different directions. I'm an architect. I design buildings. I have so many gripes when it comes to modern architecture and how we do things and how we build. I think the whole system needs to be torn down and kind of rebuilt from the ground up. So there's way more on that topic. So if you really like architecture, if you like politics, you like history, if you like art, this is kind of going to be that hub. It's going to intersect in kind of really interesting ways. At least I think it's going to be really interesting on how these things kind of connect. So yeah, just kind of stay tuned for that. But the last thing I kind of wanted to do is just kind of speak kind of broadly on some themes that I think this channel is going to continually come back to. The first being, I think, for a long time, I think America is due for a reset. I don't think, I'm not sure when people talk about like, oh, there's going to be a civil war, in America. It's like, I don't know. I can't, I'm not a future predictor. I do think there's going to be crisis definitely on the horizon. I just, the way I look at current affairs, in the country, everybody in the country is kind of angry. Now, obviously, there's the caveat of people saying, get off the computer, get out, touch grass. You don't see people arguing. It's like, well, actually, you do. I mean, I see a lot more protests. I mean, I grew up in the 90s. I've never heard of national protests, really. I mean, there's the 60s, but I've never really seen or heard of protests as frequent and as large as they are in the United States since Donald Trump's election. So, obviously there was the anti-Iraq war things. I'm not trying to ignore those things or brush those under the rug, but I think the frequency, the size, and the chaos kind of around these protests, kind of more recent protests, I think that's and the intensity. I think that those are the things that are kind of catching my attention. I also think that the fact that more people, these are issues that are grabbing more people from the sidelines. I think, you could argue early 2000s and, the 90s whenever there were protests, they were kind of localized. They were kind of specific, and it was kind of, in the body politic, like the people at the top seemed to kind of have a distance from it. Everyone talks about like the Sister Soldier moment from Bill Clinton. I couldn't imagine a time in the 90s where a politician in America, like a major national politician, kind of, was, for instance, in favor of the 1992 Rodney King riots in LA. I can't see that happen. I mean, maybe somebody did. I don't know. But yeah, I just couldn't see that happening at that time, but now we have major national political figures that basically soft pedal rioting, looting, all that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that points to the amount of anger and dis-ease that's in the country. Now, to my conservative friends, I have a lot of people, at my church, for instance, who will argue all day long for, very, stock Republican, 1980s, 1990s Republican cut taxes, shrink government perspective. There's no room, government is small enough that you can drown it in a bathtub, this kind of mentality. And, personally, okay, zooming out, I think this debate over, like, what's better, large government, small government, or these debates about, like, what's the point, what's the role of the government? I kind of think that these things are kind of dumb questions. I think they miss totally the point. And I actually would argue, and I will make this point in the future, you can bet your bottom dollar, that's actually not a conservative, or that's not a classical conservative take. It's really kind of more of a modern take. Actually, one of the things I've been really wrestling with is kind of what does it mean to be a conservative in America? Because I think the whole project of America at its core, fundamentally, is kind of a liberal project. That's going to definitely ruffle some feathers probably, but I'll explain more on that later. But kind of, thinking about what does it mean to be a conservative, especially a traditionalist conservative. What does that mean? What does that look like? So anyway, I just think there's a lot of things going on in America right now that are, people talk around certain things. Some people, I think, get their finger directly on the pulse. I think a lot of people, frankly, just don't see or seem to want to know what time it is. So I kind of discard those people. But yeah, I think, for my conservative friends, I think just kind of embracing Reagan, Thatcher, neoliberal, commerce, international commerce isn't really cutting it anymore. I think the mask is off. I mean, I think this idea never worked, never could have worked, at least not long term. And I think we're now reaching the kind of end of its natural lifespan. So, and then I think what's the social unrest, all of the kind of the racial narratives, the gender narratives, all these things that are happening, I think are outgrowths of people wrestling with what's ill in America. And I think this kind of, I think there's a lot of people on the conservative side, kind of your traditional Republican side, I should say, who think that, no, what we need to basically do is kind of embrace kind of social conservative values and embrace kind of unfettered capitalism, and that's going to fix all the problems. And I'm just like, that, again, okay, I agree with you on the first part, but the second part is where I take big issue. Like that, I would argue, is some of the driving factors, what's driving the disease in the country. So, I think that there's a lot of people who kind of miss, that point. So, I think that there's also, I don't know, I think when it comes to the globe, there's a lot of talk about World War III, potentially, nuclear exchange. Again, I'm not going to sit here and, give my own predictions. I definitely have spicy opinions when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. Maybe they're not that spicy for the internet. I always kind of think, I have this like really spicy take, and then you look at the internet, and like everyone's, in my opinion, is kind of like lost their mind. So actually, if I back up, who's gonna like this channel? I have no idea. I have no idea who this channel is for. I have no clue. I'm just kind of a guy, just kind of putting his thoughts out there. But one of the things, if you're expecting me to kind of just say some wacky thing, just to say a wacky thing to get attention, like I don't think that's helpful. I think there's a lot of people doing that anyway on the internet. I don't want to be part of that. Actually, I don't really have much of a social media presence. I think I'll probably end up getting more of one, especially if this channel kind of takes off. But for now, I'm trying to be a person who is, responsible, and, but I feel like I still do have some pretty not mainstream takes and some pretty not mainstream views. So, I'll just kind of come out right and say it. I do support the Russians, actually, kind of full stop. Again, I don't know. That's going to probably definitely ruffle some feathers. I just think the way the world is currently constituted, people talk about like Putin and Trump want to return, and Xi, they all want to return to like the 19th century world order. And it's just like, dude, that's how the world worked up until 2 seconds ago. Like the way the world worked basically operated as it had in that time period. So like if you go to people in that time period, and you say like, you explain how world politics works, people are going to be like, well, yeah, I mean, like that's kind of how it works, and I think we have such a recency bias. We have also a survivor's bias especially in America, and then more broadly in the West, of like how things work. And I just kind of think, it like the world, quote unquote, changed at the end of World War II, but then like the rest of the world kind of kept their own thing going. They just kind of say, hey, we're playing kind of a new game, but they never kind of took their eye off the main game, which is kind of the, again, 19th century kind of world politics. So anyway, I just think that the fact that all these institutions are kind of coming down, crumbling, I think that actually that's a good thing. I'm in favor of that. But I just say, everybody buckle up. There's a great line from Game of Thrones I really love, where it's basically, they greet each other, especially at the later seasons. Good luck in the wars to come, and I'm just like, I kind of want that to be like my saying now to people, like, just say like, good luck in the wars to come, because I do think like, we are definitely headed for a more turbulent time. As people like to say, welcome back to history. We had a little break for 80 years from history, but now we're re-entering it. So I kind of say buckle up. So this Star Wars styled news recap, I think will definitely kind of cover that re-entering of history period of time that we're going to find ourselves in. There's a whole World War II discussion on the internet. I have some pretty definitely spicy takes. I don't know. YouTube is probably not going to like what I have to say. The internet, most likely, like major platforms on the internet, probably not going to like what I have to say. But that's okay. We'll definitely cross that bridge when we get there. So anyway, I don't want to ramble on for too much longer. I think this is kind of enough. Just giving everybody a little bit of a brief intro. I plan to make a little bit more of a formal introduction in the coming weeks. So stay tuned. We will talk in the future. So goodbye and thanks for watching.